Today we want to finish up the cost-benefit analysis case we did in Excel. And then remember, we're doing this part of the class backwards. I'm going to the class notes last. We'd already done time value of money, so you already had a good basis for cost-benefit analysis. And so we'll finish up the case in Excel that we started last week, and then we'll get to some important concepts that are in the class notes. So last week we started the project. We had some description of it. We had the different pages set up. We got all the assumptions set up. I added a little bit of words here that we didn't have last time. I put per FTE, and I'll talk about why that's important when we get into the building the base case. And so now we're building the base case. Remember, we already set up time. So here's all of our time. We're using that mid-year convention. You notice that the date's different than the last video because I have this equal to days, so you can see what days I was working on this. So I set up several blocks for benefits. We won't need all of these. We'll use probably 4 of these. I have a couple of blocks for costs. If you need more, you can just insert columns and add more. I've got 2 here. We only need 1 for this case. Your team might need more for yours. It just depends. And so that's what we have set up so far. So what we want to do is go across and build our benefits. Now, it's really important to remember this first line is times 0. So we won't be using this first line for benefits. The only place we'll use the first line is on the costs. Our technology, our software development costs, all happen at time 0. After that, everything happens throughout the year. So what do we want? Well, the first thing we want is the number of transactions. All right, so I'm going to keep the color coding going here. There's my transactions. So how many transactions we have throughout the first year? Well, if we go back to our assumptions, we know they do 80,000 of these a year. However, we only think we can convert under the base case. We're doing the base case. We can only convert 70%. So in the first year, make sure you hit the comma and no decimal places. We'll convert 56,000 in the first year. Now, how many do we convert in the second year? In the second year, we take that 56,000 times, and we think that these transactions are going to grow at 4%, and we want to lock that in with the dollar signs. And so the next year, hit the comma and no decimal places. The next year, we think that's going to grow from 56,000 up to 58,000. So what I want to do is bring these formulas down so you can see them. So my convention is to take the first line and copy down at the bottom, and if the second line is different than the first line, bring that down as well so you can see it. It's rare that the third, fourth, and fifth line will be different. Usually, the first line might be different from the second line, but the second line you usually just copy down. That's true. It's hard for me to think of a situation where that wouldn't be. So that's the number of transactions. It's transactions saved. So let's look at FTEs saved. Now, what is an FTE? An FTE is a full-time equivalent. And so what we're saying there is this is a special area. The lady who runs this department, well, I had a lot of admiration of how well she ran a very difficult department. It's people with really strange schedules. Most of them are high school graduates, very few that are college and career type people. They just need extra income, or they're starting out, or maybe they're even in college. So people with strange schedules. So she might have 3 people making up one full-time equivalent. So you might have someone working 15 hours a week, someone working 20 hours a week. But in our assumptions, when we say each employee can do 20,000, we mean each full-time equivalent employee. And I bring that up, full-time equivalent, because you probably should know that term. I remember there was a lady I recommended from USAA from UTSA, and USAA hired her, and I thought she was really excellent, very smart, very energetic person. I thought she'd do great, and her boss came to me just a few days after she was hired, and her boss was all upset. She said, "How could you recommend this person? She doesn't even know what an FTE is. And I thought, you know, a lot of undergraduate students and graduate students don't know what an FTE is. I don't remember using that term ever. So there are some terms that people out there in the field, they use it all the time, and they just assume everybody knows what an FTE is. And this poor student had never heard it before, and her boss just thought that was the most incredibly horrible thing. So an FTE is full-time equivalent. That one full-time equivalent might be one person, it might be two people, it might be three people. Now, how many FTEs will we save? Well, we're going to save 56,000 transactions. That divided by how many transactions each person can do, and we want to lock that in. I use the F4 function. So that's 2.8 transactions. I'm going to hit the comma sign. You know, here you do want 2 decimal places, and then you can copy this down. So the next year is the same thing. You take the transactions saved divided by 20,000. So that shows you exactly how many transactions we're gonna, how many people we're gonna save on a full-time basis. And why do we do that? Well, because our salary and comp is based on a full-time equivalent, not on the number of people. We don't pay each person $50,000. We pay each full-time equivalent $50,000. So if this full-time equivalent is 2 people, we'll pay each person $25,000 plus an additional 15%. So that's why we do everything on an FTE basis. All right, so the salary and comp is going to be, in the first year, it will be $50,000 times 1 plus 15%. So we don't pay them $50,000, we actually pay them, and here use the dollar sign, and I would recommend no decimal places here. If you had decimals, it wouldn't be terrible, but no decimal places. So $57,500, $50,000 in salary, and an additional $7,500 in compensation. Now that is going to grow. Almost all of you in your project is going to have somewhere where you take a beginning number times 1 plus some inflation number. So here, what is our inflation? Well, they told us growth and compensation is 5%. We need to lock that in and use a dollar sign and no decimal places. And now you can copy that down. You copy these 2 down so you can see them. So now we have our salary saved. All right, so each person that we save will on average be paid $57,500. I'm going to call this column other because we don't need it. We'll just put it in there as a holding place in case we needed it. So I'm building this so that your case for your project might need more columns, may need fewer, but we'll just have it in there just in case we need it. And then total saved. So how much is our total saved? Our total saved is our salary and comp times the FTEs that we have. So the first year we'll save 161,000 and on down. So let me copy that down so you can see it. So that's the total amount we saved. We don't need this column at all. So we've got everything built on the savings. Now what about the cost? Well, the only cost we have is software development. So software development, I recommend everything. If it's a positive number, type it as a positive number. If it's a negative number, if it's an outflow, do it as a outflow. Don't say it's a cost and the cost is $80,000 and just know that's a cost. That's because it's a cost, it's negative. I would say if it's positive, type it as positive. If it's negative, type it as negative. So our cost is going to be minus the total systems cost, $565,000. So there's our cost. That's the only cost we have. So I'll just say other here. So our other costs, we just have a holding place for that. And again, if you need more columns, you can just add them in. So what's our net cash flow? I'm going to actually bring this down here. We don't need that upper row. So here we can just add it across. It's our savings plus our costs. We can copy that down. There we have our net cash flow for this project. All right. So I'm going to put this up at the top. You can put it wherever, but I put it at the top. The nice thing about putting this up at the top is if you need more rows, you don't have stuff down at the bottom. Now you won't have all of this. Hopefully you're not typing this. You don't need all of this down at the bottom because you know, I'm just putting that there for you. So you can not do that, or if you did it, just delete it. You don't need it. But let's put at the top the net present value, the internal rate of return, and then we'll do the discounted payback. So there's everything we need. So the net present value, remember we're going to use the equal X NPV, and then Bill Gates will show you what you need. The first thing is the rate. So let's go over to the rate. Cost of capital 7%, comma, and come back to the base case. Now, one thing to warn you, I'm going to actually go through here and check. You don't want the word base case in the file that says base case. All right, very, 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 very important. All right, so then, because if you do that, if it has the word base case, when you copy this over for the best case, it will still be referencing the base case, and you don't want it to reference the base case. You want to reference the case that you're in. You do want this always to be the assumptions. That makes sense, but you don't want that to be base case. So the next thing it says is your values. So here's our values. And again, we don't want the word base case in there, so just take that out. I don't know why Bill Gates keeps doing that to us. And then the last thing are your dates. So we'll put the dates in there, and again, he's saying base case, so you want to take that out. You don't want the word base case anywhere in here. And you close and hit enter. Put it in a dollar and no decimals. So our net present value is $245,752. So remember, we'll use the equal. If that is greater or equal to 0, you put accept, comma, put reject. So we're going to accept that. The internal rate of return, the exact same thing. We'll do equal X IRR that we did before. The first thing we do are the values, comma, and the dates. And it says if you need a guess, you can put the guess in there, but we don't need the guess. We'll put that in there, do it as percent. I do like having IRR go out 2 decimal places. And here we'll do equal if that is greater than or equal to, go back to the assumptions, our cost of capital, comma, type accept, comma, type reject. So that's acceptable. Our cost of capital is 7%, and here we have 24% return, which is much better than 7%, so we accept. All right. So we're cooking here. We're doing great. So what we got to do is add what we need for the discounted payback. Remember on this one, so I forget how many columns we need, so we need to set this up. So I'm going to say calcs for discounted payback. We'll put them all over here on the side. The first one we want is the cumulative net present value. Remember that these are calculations. I don't know what we want to put calculations for color for there, but let's just make it kind of dull. We'll use kind of a grayish here. So we start out at time 0, it's negative. Remember, time 0 doesn't count. We start at 1, so we will need to equal X NPV. This is going to be a little bit of pain because we have to keep getting the rate. Over here is 7%. We'll lock that in, comma, we come back to base case, but remember we don't want the word base case in there. And then it wants the values. Here we just want those. And again, Bill Gates keeps putting that base case in there. So we'll take that out. But we want it to be $I, $9. But we don't want to lock in the 10 because we want to copy it down. We want it to be 9 through 10, then 9 through 11, then 9 through 12. And then comma. And then the last part is the dates. So let's go get the dates. And again, we don't want the word base case there, but we do want it to be $A, $9. And we'll hit close parentheses there. So our net present value, this is dollars, so we'll put dollars, no reason to have cents. Our net present value, let me copy this down just so you can see it. Our net present value at the end of the year one, our net present value is negative $409,000. Now some students again get confused because of the mid-year convention, but that is the net present value at the end of year one. It's not the net present value at the middle of year one, it's the end of year one. We're just assuming that these cash flows are evenly distributed throughout year one, but still at the end of year one, that is our net present value. We can copy that down, and we know we've done it right if the very last year exactly equals our net present value. Because essentially this formula and this formula are exactly the same. If you can even look at them, they're exactly the same. All right. Then we'll do each year NPV. So here we'll take in the first year we take the cumulative net present value minus the previous year's times zeros. So this first year our cumulative net present value is that year's net present value is $155,000. That is the present value of $161,000 is $155,000 if we receive that $161,000 throughout the year. All right. The next year, we take the cumulative net present value versus the prior year's net present value. So here it's a little bit different between year one and year two because year one I go back and reference that initial software development costs, but they're very similar. Here you have J minus N. J minus I. Here you have J minus J, all in the same column. So we can bring that down. The sum of this column plus our initial cost should give us our net present value, and it does, $245,752. So we did that correctly. And so here we're going to say percentage of year used. So I think we only need 3 columns, so let's put this all in one area. We'll use dark. So however you want to do it, I don't care about your color, but have something that's uniquely yours. So percentage of the year used. So I might do this formula slightly different than what we did last time and the initial problems, and that's fine because there's more than one way to do it, but let's see if I do it exactly the same because I don't remember. So the first question we ask is, hey, is the current year still less than or equal, or we'll say less than 0? If it is, we need 100% of this year. We're still in deficit. So then we'll say comma. Well, here we know the current year is positive. So if the current year is positive, then the question we ask is, was the previous year greater than or equal to 0? If it was, we don't need any of this year. We'll have to make one change because there on the very first year I'm referencing back to time 0, and I didn't want to put that in this column, this row. I can't remember how I did it in the previous problem, so we might have a little bit of a difference there, but that's fine. So we'll fix it in the next row. If that's not the case, so here we got a case where the current year is positive, but the prior year is negative. So this is the year we're interested in. So here what we're looking for is we want to take minus the prior year's deficit and divide it by this year's net present value. And that's going to tell us. So we should get 100% here. Now, I'm going to copy that down, but we have to change one thing here, or a couple of things here. What we want to do is, instead of referencing that initial cash flow, I want to reference everything in this column. So you'll notice the difference, and let me put the formulas down so you can see that there is a difference here. And I might have done it again, I might have done it differently less. I don't always do this exactly the same. But I didn't, for some reason this time I did not want to have the initial costs here. I didn't want to make this look like a year. You could have that there, then you wouldn't have these problems with the function keep changing. But if you don't bring over the initial cash flow, then the first row and the second row will be slightly different. You'll have J and I on the first row and J on the second row. Same thing here. You'll have J and I, R, you'll have J and J. Now if I did it correctly, we'll see, we should see, here's the year where the net present value went from negative to positive. So that looks right. We start off with a deficit of $88,000, but we added $165,000 in net present value. So 88 divided by 165 gives us 53%. So it looks like we set it up correctly. So everything looks good there. And so what is our payback here? Our payback's just going to be the sum of those. And I'm going to put it, because I do it in years, it's 3.53 years. So here we say equal if that is less than or equal to, here it's less than or equal to, we go back to the assumptions, the payback standard, comma, we accept, comma, we reject. Make sure you put those in quotes. So here we accept on all three. Let me put these functions over on the side so you can see them. And again, you don't need to retype. You don't need these formulas off on the side. So here, if you freeze the video right here and do a snip of something, you'll have the entire thing worked out with the formulas. So it might be a little bit small. I don't know how to get this just exactly the right, as large as I can make it. So there's everything. We've completed the base case. So we're really in good shape here. We've got the base case done. And once you get the base case, it gets really, really easy. All right. So if you want to hit pause so you can go back, make sure you're getting these numbers. You're not, look how the formatting, make it look as professional as possible all the way throughout. Now, if you've got that, what we're going to do then is add the best case. All right, so with your teams, with your projects, I do not want you to do the best case and worst case until you've sat down with me and gone over your base case. We want to make sure the base case is exactly what you want. All right, so we're going to take this whole thing and copy it. We're just going to hit enter and put it as our best case. I'm going to get rid of all these formula things because we don't need them. Our links should all work. That should take us back to the overview, back to the base case, back to the overview. So all we have to do here is we need to hyperlink the base case. And I'm not sure why it's not letting me link. There it is. It's just called link. Wow, it doesn't say hyperlink anymore. Sorry about that. And we want to hyperlink it to the best case. And then you want to make it 22. I don't know why Bill Gates does that. So here we have the best case. So we got our best case. There's the overture, overview, the assumptions, base case. Go to the best case. You got the best case in there. So let me show you how fast this is going to be, because if you go back to our assumptions, the only thing that changes for our best case is we convert 90% instead of 70%. So we just got to know, where is that 90%? We don't have any other scenarios. So where is our 90%? Where the only place that 90% is right here on the number of transactions. So instead of assumptions B9, we're going to do assumptions B10. That's the only difference. Everything else is fine. Remember, we want to make sure the words base case are not anywhere in here. I think we got rid of them. Remember, we had some problems in some places where it was referencing base case. We will make sure the words base case are not anywhere in any of our formulas, but I'm pretty sure we got them all. So you can see everything automatically went higher. So you can see why you want the words, you want the word assumptions in there, because you always want it to reference back to that, but you don't want anything on this page referencing the base case, or it's going to mess up your file. So everything's set up. You can see our break even came a year earlier. So everything's better. That's our base case. So you can see with our best case, we can do our best case in a matter of seconds. It's really fast. Let's add another one. Let's do the worst case. For the worst case, we can just take the best case, click up on that little triangle, Control C, come over to the worst case, hit enter. Now we've already got the worst case built, except for what? Our transactions. Which transactions is the worst case? It's line 11. So we can just change line 10 to line 11, and just like that, we've got our worst case. And it's still acceptable except for in the payback. Our payback is greater than 4 years. That's the only one that rejects. So just like that, we have everything set up. Let's go back to the overview, and then we'll right click and link this. That's absolutely brand new. I did this in my other machine last time, and so it looks like the newer version of Excel, it just says link, not hyperlink. So we're going to make that the worst case, and then we'll expand that up to 22. So we got our worst case. All right, so we got everything built in here. In a matter of seconds, we have it. The next one we want to do is the break-even case. So the break-even case, we're actually going to bring in the worst case or the base case, whatever you want to do, just any of them. Do Control C, hit enter. Now, how do we do the base case? Well, here, the break-even case. The break-even case, you have to have somewhere in here your sensitivity analysis. For us, our sensitivity analysis is percentage of transactions automated. So I'm going to copy that title over, bring it over here, percentage of transactions automated. And I'm just going to plug in a number, 50%. So here on the transactions, rather than going back to the assumptions page, we're going to reference something on this page, the 50%. Now I'm using the 50% because that's what my worst case scenario was, 50%. So then I can make sure everything stayed the same, everything's set up correctly. So 14,109, 14,109. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do data, what if analysis, goal seek, and I'm going to tell goal seek that I want my net present value to equal 0 by changing this assumption. All right, look at that. We want to set our net present value equal to 0 by changing the assumption we're doing the break even on. And when I hit enter, Bill Gates will find it for me. Now this says reject because Bill Gates has it as slightly as a negative number, but you don't care about this reject. It's actually accept because it's 0. I don't know why Bill Gates, he didn't get it right to 0, so that's fine. If you want to on this one, this is one you might do equal round just this one place. Maybe go out 5 decimal places. If you go out 5 decimal places and get it, you don't want to do rounding anywhere else. If you do rounding anywhere in here, you won't be able to find the break even. But here, because Bill Gates, there's a problem in Excel with a rounding where they have several decimal places out where it's a problem. It actually, for some really sensitive applications, that error has actually caused some firms enormous problems. But so that's the only place you might use the round function. And I'll actually type this over to the side just in case you want to see how to write the round function. So the round function, you just do equal round, and then you tell it comma 0. The comma can be, comma 5, comma 2. You can do comma -5. You want to round it to the nearest 10,000s or whatever. All right. So there we've got everything set up. All we got to do is go back to the overview of the project, and we've got a link to break even. So we got everything set up. So let's go to the summary table. So what are we going to do on the summary table? So in the summary table, we're going to do the data that we want be part of our analysis. You know, this is going to be a table we'll actually probably put in the paper itself or in your presentation. That's going to be the summary. So what do we want to summarize? Well, we want to know the percentage of transactions converted. That's pretty central to this case. Yours might be miles driven in a year. If you're doing solar panels, it might be square feet of the house, or whatever you're testing, whatever your break-even case is based on. We want to know for that particular case, what was the net present value, what was the internal rate of return, what was the discounted payback. All right. So here we're going to have the base case, the best case, the worst case, and the break even. On the break even, we actually don't need to see, the internal rate of return and the discounted payback. They don't make sense, so we'll just block those out. All right, let's get our columns to a good width. Let's try, I always like 15 is a good width, and we'll have some color coding here. So bold, let's use white text, and let's give it that, my favorite, dark blue, but whatever you want to do, that's a little too dark blue, but good old nice dark blue. Center, but you establish yours. I'm going to come down here to return to overview. I'm going to move it up, Control X, and bring it up here so I can go a little bit larger on the size of the font. All right. So percentage converted, our base case is 70%. Our best case is 90%. So here you just go out and go get your data. Your worst case is 50%. And then the break even, here you have to actually go to the break even case. The break even's 49%, really close to our worst case. The net present value for the base case, you just go grab that number. Our internal rate return, those you can copy down because they're right next to each other, but you do want to make sure you clean it up. I really do not like projects when students have stuff that look like this. That just looks so unprofessional. So what makes sense? So this is in percents, this is in years, this is in dollars. So there we have everything we need. Now, if you want to, you could lock those in. Just F2 to edit it and F4 to lock it in. And then you could just copy it over and just change the word base to best if you want to, or you can just go find them. So there we've got those three. We can copy those over and now change best to worst. And then here, one of the reasons we wanted to make the break-even rounded is we want this to show this as 0. We want our boss to see that as 0 because it gets confusing if you have Bill Gates and he shows it as slightly -0 or something along those lines. That's just confusing, so you don't want to do that. And the only reason we put net present value there is because we want, it's definitional. We want them to know that break even means net present value is 0. So it's not like, wow, look, the net present value is 0 for a break even case. Well, no, that's by definition. All right. Over here, we'll bold this, and I'll use the blue here. In fact, I'm going to put the blue there up in the corner, and then just, make it professional. Format the cells. Put some borders on it, so I like a thick outline, and then something along those lines. However you want to make it look nice and professional. So there's your final recommendation. Now, a few things to be real careful here, and probably the most important thing is on this payback. If your net present value, let me give you an example. I'll do worst case. Let's say our worst case was 25%. All right, that's not actually in this case. Our worst case is 25%. So let's look at that. In this case, net present value is negative, IRR is negative. Look at our discounted payback. It shows that it's 5 years, but it's not 5 years. It's just that 5 years is all we built. So we don't know what this is. Now, this is a case where you might actually add more years solely for the payback. You just want to know how far out in the future do you need to go before the payback actually pays back. So we really don't know what the payback is here. If we were to copy this down a few rows, you can see the payback is actually, for this project, if only 25% are converted, the payback is 9.32 years. So, so you'd have to do more years. So that's the one thing I'm going to be very careful of. On the summary table, if it shows 5 years, you need to somehow convert that. So you might have to say concatenate. Well, you have to put a lot of if function in there. So if you did 5 years and your break even is exactly 5, that's not a good answer. You cannot show that 5. So you need this. You might have to go in and physically go in and just say greater than 5 or something along those lines. So you may have to physically change it. So I have students do their project and they say our net present value is negative 275,000, our IRR is negative 15.8%, and our payback is 5 years, and that is absolutely wrong. The payback is not 5 years. It just shows 5 years because that's where you stopped, all right? So just be aware of that. In this case, that wasn't a problem because we had a positive net present value, and so our payback was still, if the present value is positive, then your payback will be less than however many years you have. That has to be the case. But if your net present value is negative, then your payback will show that it's exactly the number here. And so, yeah, maybe I should put an if function in here. There's ways I could do it with an if function to say, hey, if net present value is negative, I could have done that here. Let me show you how I could have done that here. We could say if net present value is less than 0, saying payback is greater than 5 years, comma. So we could have done that. That way, if we change our assumption to 25% and go to the worst case, then you see payback is greater than 5 years. You can't quite see it because it's not wide enough. All right, so you could do that if you want to in your project. I love the if function. That way you cover yourself so you don't forget those things if you put that in there. All right, so we got everything built. Everything's linked. We get the overview. We got the assumptions. We can go to the base case. We can go back to the overview. Everything's linked. So you've got a file. So step back. And this is what I grade you on. Step back and pretend like you put this on LinkedIn. And people are looking at this. Does it look professional? Is there anything that stands out that doesn't look professional? Make sure if you put it on LinkedIn, your file isn't sitting way over here somewhere when they load it. Make sure you do Control Home on every page so that everything is you're right where you want to be. We don't need these extra formulas in there. I did that just for us. Make sure when you save it that it saves so it comes up to this first page. Don't save it so that you're on the break-even case. So, you might even actually email it to yourself and open it from your email to see exactly what they're going to see when they open it, or just open the file on your computer. Make sure you save it exactly the way you want them to see it when you put it on LinkedIn. Maybe not this particular case, but when you do a case for your project and you can actually talk about your project and actually give them the presentation for your project, that Excel case, you want to make it look as professional as possible. So now we want to go to the class notes. I'm on about page 26. Look for the capital budgeting, also known as CBA's, cost benefit analysis. I actually don't like the term capital budgeting because a lot of accountants, because we use the word capital budgeting, they think the word capital means things like buildings and computers and trucks. They think of them as capital assets, but the word capital is actually not referring to assets. It's actually referring to liabilities and net worth. It's actually on the right-hand side of the balance sheet because so many accountants use the term capital budgeting, a lot of accountants have gotten confused. The word capital refers to assets, but the word capital is talking about the funding you need to buy those type of assets. It's debt, it's issuing stocks. So cost benefit analysis might be a safer term to use. What we just did with this cost benefit analysis is a very common question that they'll ask in interviews. More and more firms are sending out cases for students to work as part of the interview process. And there's three things that they tend to do on those type of analysis, and one of them could be a cost benefit analysis. I've seen that. I've seen some contribution margin types of cases where they'll talk about fixed costs and variable costs. So we don't do that in this class. Hopefully you had an accounting class that did contribution margin analysis. Make sure somewhere in your college career you're doing contribution margin analysis, because that's a pretty common question and a pretty important concept. And then the other thing they ask is ratio analysis, which is exactly what we did for Project 1. So Project 1 and Project 2, those are two of the three most common things that firms will ask you to do in an interview kind of prep question. So remember this stuff. It's important stuff. So let's talk, what is capital budgeting? What is cost benefit analysis? What were we just doing? So we just saw an example case of this cash handling project where we wanted to spend money on software development so we could convert something from a manual process to an electronic process. So that's the very first example we have. Should we do this software internally? And we decided to develop it internally. It cost us $500,000. Maybe we could have bought something off the shelf that would have cost $450,000, but it wouldn't have had all the bells and whistles we wanted. Let's say a business segment that's not performing very well. In fact, the very first major project I got in my career is very interesting. The CFO came to my desk and he said, "Ron, we have this product. It was a healthcare product. We're losing money on it. I want to shut it down. Go out and do an analysis to show that this product is a bad product financially," because he wanted to shut it down. And so there, I went and did that type of analysis, and what I discovered was that was actually a very profitable product, but because of the way they were doing the cost allocation, because this product had a lot of people assigned to it, it had a lot of costs of the corporation be assigned to it. Those are costs that just being assigned to it because they are assigned based on number of people, but those costs would not gone away. If we had shut down that product line, all those costs that were being allocated to it would have been allocated to other products. And so what I showed was this was actually a very profitable product. It was just getting really saddled with a lot of costs. And one of my best friends at the company was the person who did the cost allocation. And she said, I'll fix that. So she just changed one of her processes for allocating costs. She shifted it over to the life line. The life insurance line was so profitable, they didn't even notice those costs coming over to it, and fix the problem. So I had to go back to my boss, who was telling me, he wasn't telling me to see if this project made sense. He was telling me, prove to me this product doesn't make sense. He already gave me the biases of what he believed. But I did it, I try to ignore his biases, and I did the analysis, and that's what I discovered, that this product made sense. So yeah, so you got a business product that's losing money. You would do you see there we have a combination of the contribution margin and the cost benefit analysis. That's why that contribution margin, the fixed costs and variable costs and allocated costs is so important. If you decide the product line doesn't make sense, do you sell it to another business or do you just shut it down? Maybe you want to buy someone else's business segment. Maybe they got a business that we really like and they don't like it, and we can manage it better than they can, so we'll take that. So you saw Amazon bought Whole Foods. So what does that do? That gives Amazon all of these storefronts. That's real important to their long-term business strategy. They haven't quite yet figured out what to do with that. Maybe we should merge with another business. In the Investment Society, we have a presentation every Monday night on mergers and acquisitions. That's a big part of business. In fact, a lot of businesses, when they're struggling, that becomes their solution to everything, and it's usually not the best solution. What about a new product? So we offer a new product. What would the competitive environment do if we do this? Can we price it adequately? What if we come in with a new product and we try to undersell the competition? What if the competition just cuts their prices and we all just end up losing a lot of money? Is that going to be an issue? Maybe we should outsource a function. I remember at USAA we had this big project of outsourcing, insourcing. In fact, one of the reasons I got involved in cost-benefit analysis was a project that said they wanted to outsource something. They didn't want to use USAA anymore. They wanted to go to an outside firm. And everybody knew that was going to hurt USAA if they did that, but this particular entity, because that particular function had so many costs allocated to it, when they were using that function at USAA, they weren't just covering that function's cost, but they're covering, landscaping and then building, air conditioning, all this other stuff. If they went out to another business that wouldn't have all those allocated costs, they could have saved money, but USAA would have been worse. So you got to view these from the enterprise level and not just that particular siloed business. So there's a Dilbert. I don't know if you ever read Dilbert cartoons. He's somewhat cynical of American businesses, but yeah, you have this, that firms outsource a function, and then 4 years later they do a cost-benefit analysis. They decide to insource it back in. And then 4 years later, they outsource it, and just this back and forth, outsource, insource, outsource, insource. And probably because of bad numbers, bad assumptions in their cost-benefit analysis. Centralize this function. I had that at USAA as well. A big project of, do we centralize this function or do we keep it separate? So USAA had a finance function that was very diverse. Every line of business had their full finance function for accounting, for cash management. Everything was very, very decentralized. And Joe Robles, the CFO, who was later the CEO, he came in and said, I want to centralize these, and he did. He created one big department for cash management, one big department for accounting, finances. It was a huge project, quite a big difference. And USA kept that. They haven't gone back on that at all. That was one thing. It did actually make a lot of sense to me. He was a really good CEO. A CFO and CEO, so he he was making decisions for the right reasons. And he actually did ask the question, does it make sense to centralize? Everybody knew that he probably wanted to centralize it, not to give him more power, but mainly because he just believed it made more sense. It was a better way to do business. And so, yeah, he centralized. How disruptive will that be? Will it so separate that business, that function from the business, that business is, they're not going to get the services they need, whatever. So there's a lot of questions there. Efficiency projects, those are big. I did several of those during my time at UTSA. We just saw that project we just did. It was an efficiency project. It was software development in order to make us more efficient, to eliminate staffing. A marketing project, those of you that are marketing majors, you will have some major marketing project during your time, which is going to require a cost-benefit analysis. Can the cost of this project be compensated by the incremental revenue? I noticed that Apple is trying to give its customers the ability to hide the sites that it's visited from Facebook and Google. Well, if that happens, those wonderful Facebook advertisements where you go out and you search on new shoes and suddenly Facebook's giving you all these shoe commercials and advertisements. If Apple shuts that down, well, target marketing will not be possible. And so they have to go back to more generic marketing. It'll be just as expensive, or probably more expensive, but they'll be marketing to everyone rather than just marketing to the people who really might be interested in the product. That could have a huge impact on marketing in the U.S. Because of Facebook, because of Google, because of these cookies and all these other things. I don't understand all that stuff, but because we have all these companies that know exactly what we're doing, where our searches are, what internet sites we search, that allows them to really clearly target market us. What happens to marketing budgets if Apple gives people the option to not let Facebook and Google collect that information? Risk management initiatives, I was involved in several of those. We had one, I think it was back $300,000. I had to get it approved. And the problem with the risk management initiative is they almost always, or they will almost always have a negative net present value. Because a risk management initiative, what you're doing is you're paying money to protect you in case a very infrequent, low frequency event happens. So think about your auto insurance. You're paying monthly for auto insurance. If you did a net present value for auto insurance, you would actually get a negative number. And that's because on average, what you pay in auto insurance will be much less than what you're expected to receive back in claims. So why do you do that? You do that because even though you're paying more than what you expect to lose in car accidents over your life, if you have that car accident and you total your $30,000 car, that's such a horrible experience that you'd rather pay more than that spread out over your life than having to pay that $30,000 all at once. So risk management initiatives, we did that at UTSA. If this happens, we want to get this big payoff that saves us all these losses. But if it doesn't happen, we've wasted a little bit of money every year. And I had several of those projects. And you really risk that projects really don't fit in net present value context because they almost always have negative net present values, even though they may make sense. It makes sense to spend money just in case this extreme event happens because that extreme event puts you out of business. Tax savings opportunities, boy, there's a bunch of those. I remember doing one at UTSA that made a lot of sense. It was a tax savings opportunity that had a net present value of $80 million. It made a lot of sense. The IRS had signed off on it. We knew that it worked, but we never took it to the CEO, and the reason for it was, the only reason it worked was that it was a tax loophole. It was related to energy and energy consumption, and Congress had passed this law that if coal had been chemically treated, you got this big tax savings. And they forgot to put into the law that if coal was treated chemically, that it needed to be treated chemically to make it less environmentally destructive. But they forgot to put that in there. And so people were treating coal chemically, even though it had no impact on making coal cleaner. And then they were taking this big tax savings. And we just knew the headline risk on that was so bad. even though it could have saved us tens of millions of dollars. We just didn't want the article headline, USA uses tax loophole to destroy the environment or whatever. It looked so bad. The optics on it were terrible. Even though the IRS has signed off, the IRS did not like it. They wanted to shut it down, but they decided, based on what Congress did, we have no choice but to allow this. And then you have the risk that Congress would actually shut it down, and then you have this thing you spend on taxes that actually isn't working. New collections processes, I was involved in several of those. Some of these don't really work well necessarily for cost-benefit analysis. So your question might be, do we start accepting credit card payments? So, you say credit card payments. Right now, we only accept checks and cash. Maybe you have an online business. We were doing that in Costa Rica. We have a coffee business where we sell coffee online, and we accept PayPal, but we weren't accepting credit cards. And a lot of people weren't buying our coffee just because we didn't accept credit cards. Well, credit cards are very expensive. They charge you these big fees. And so, and PayPal has big fees as well. So we have to have that question. But it wasn't necessarily a cost-benefit analysis, because if we had allowed for credit cards, there would not have been an upfront cost. There just would have been an ongoing cost. So they don't always work well. There's one project I had at USAA where we wanted to change our timing on the ACH, on the automated clearinghouse, and that was it didn't really have much of an upfront cost. It would just mean we would have gotten our money a day earlier or 2 days earlier. So there is just the time value of money. So a lot of these projects don't work well as cost-benefit analysis because they don't always have an upfront cost that you have to worry about. But there's still a cost-benefit analysis, just that mainly it's just time value of money. Money on websites. I remember working on that with USAA, and sometimes you just say this is the cost of doing business. At USAA, the question wasn't, do we do a website or not? We knew we had to do a website. I mean, it's hard to believe I've been in business so long. I remember USAA building its initial website. But that was, the question wasn't, do we do it or not? We knew we had to do it. The question is, how much do we spend on it? And the answer there was, this is USAA, it's going to be high quality. We may not have the cost benefit to spend this extra $200 million. We may not be able to prove that makes sense, but it's the cost of doing business. We're going to make sure our website looks great. That's just part of how we do business. What about this business decision tool? So you have this new process. A lot of firms are struggling with this, with decision science taking over. It's pretty amazing the resources firms are putting into this. I had a process like this at USAA. It was maybe 3 people involved. And then I saw the guy running that department today, and he has 70 people. So firms are putting the money into this. 70 seems really excessive to me, but I don't know. I don't know exactly what all they're doing. But we had this project. It was several $100,000 project. It was to buy the software that could do all this modeling. We could bring all of our businesses together. And to justify it, I had to say, well, these are the decisions we'll make that we could not have made without it. But I couldn't really prove that it was cost-benefit positive because I didn't know exactly what decisions we would make. I knew the type of decision we would test, but I didn't know what we would find with the decision support tool. But we got it approved, and that particular project ended up saving USAA probably $2 billion in 2008 alone. I mean, it ended up being a huge beneficial. We ran that project, and boy, it was eye-opening. Some things we were doing we needed to change. And then we tried to do that project again and expand it, and they wouldn't approve it because we couldn't prove the benefit, even though we grossly overapproved the benefit in 2008. What about a regulatory environment? A lot of times people say, well, if it's the regulators required or law requires it, then you have to do it. You have no choice. But there are questions, first of all, but how much do you have to spend on it? Do you just meet the letter of the law, or do you actually implement? And I've actually had some people say, just because the regulators say to do it and law says to do it doesn't mean you have to do it. I had a student in one class. I was surprised he told the whole class this, but San Antonio had rules about watering your grass, and there were fines, and there were, they could come in and fine you and give you tickets. And he said, "Forget it. I'm not going to follow it. I'm going to keep watering my grass. If the fines are going to charge me is less than what it's going to cost me to reset my entire yard." So he decided just to ignore the law and keep doing what he's doing and just hope his neighbors didn't turn him in. And yeah, there are probably some businesses that say, "Hey, you know what? We'll just ignore it. And if they want to shut us down, they can shut us down, or they can fine us or whatever." So even on something that's required by law, it's possible the firm will say, "Forget it." So where can we go from here? Well, I want to talk about the process of capital budgeting. We'll get into that down here. And then there's a few special issues we need to work on. We've covered a lot of this in the Excel already, so we'll go through the notes fairly quickly. Once we get through the process, we'll go through the notes pretty quickly. But there are a few things we do have to talk about. Projects that especially the biggest issue is probably comparing, if you have 10 projects and you're trying to decide which of those 10 projects to do, and they're all different sizes, they all have different years. Some are 3-year projects, some are 10-year projects, some are $1 million cost, some are $20 million cost projects. How do you handle that deluge of all these different types of projects? What about net present value? What if net present value is negative, but internal rate of return is positive? It's good. One is reject, one's accept. How do we make a decision there? So that's the type of things we're going to cover here. So we'll probably finish all of this next class. So we should have a good start. So what I want you to do is the Excel that we've done, keep that in mind as we go through the rest of these notes. Now that you have a good example in mind, and that was my hope, that you see how it's done, and now we'll talk about the issues.